Megan had always been a skeptic, brushing off ghost stories and urban legends as mere figments of overactive imaginations. That was until she heard about the highway to nowhere. Nestled in the outskirts of a sleepy town, the highway was rumored to be haunted by the spirits of those who had vanished without a trace. Determined to debunk the myth, Megan packed her camera and set out to document her journey. The sun was setting as she started her car, the sky transforming into a canvas of warm hues. The highway was eerily empty, devoid of the usual hustle and bustle. Trees lined both sides of the road, their branches reaching out like skeletal hands. As she drove deeper into the forest, an unsettling feeling began to creep up her spine. Half an hour into her drive, Megan spotted a figure in the distance. She slowed down, squinting through the fog that had suddenly rolled in. The figure was indistinct, more shadow than substance. As she approached, it vanished into the mist, leaving her questioning her own eyes. Determined to continue, Megan shook off the encounter as a trick of the light, but the feeling of unease persisted, gnawing at the edges of her confidence. She turned on her high beams, hoping to pierce through the thickening fog. A few miles later, she saw an old, rusted car on the side of the road. It looked like it had been abandoned for years, overgrown bushes and weeds reclaiming it as part of the forest. Megan pulled over, curiosity getting the better of her. She stepped out of her car, the air heavy with silence. As she approached the vehicle, she noticed the windows were shattered, and the interior was covered in dust and cobwebs. The car door was slightly ajar, and she could see what looked like a tattered map on the passenger seat. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the brittle paper. The map was old, its edges frayed and the ink faded. It was marked with strange symbols and cryptic notations. Megan tried to make sense of it, but the symbols were unlike anything she had ever seen. Her heart raced as she realized the map seemed to detail the very highway she was on, with marked locations that sent a chill down her spine. Determined to uncover the truth, Megan got back in her car and continued driving, the map clutched tightly in her hand. The road seemed to stretch endlessly, each mile feeling longer than the last. The fog thickened, and the trees seemed to close in around her. Suddenly, she saw another figure by the roadside, this one clearer than the last. It was a man, his features obscured by a hood. Megan's instincts told her to drive past, but something compelled her to stop. She rolled down her window slightly, calling out to him. The man lifted his head, revealing hollow eyes that seemed to look right through her. "Turn back," he whispered, his voice barely audible over the sound of the engine. Before she could respond, he vanished, leaving Megan trembling with fear. Hours later, Megan arrived at a small town. It looked abandoned, the buildings dilapidated, and the windows broken. She parked her car and stepped out, the air filled with an eerie silence. The town felt frozen in time, as if its inhabitants had vanished overnight. Megan walked through the empty streets, her footsteps echoing off the crumbling walls. She entered what appeared to be an old diner, the door creaking ominously. Inside, the tables were set as if expecting patrons, but a thick layer of dust covered everything. She felt like she was intruding on a forgotten memory. In the back of the diner, Megan found an old journal. Its leather cover was cracked and worn, the pages yellowed with age. She opened it, her eyes scanning the handwritten entries. The journal belonged to a man named Thomas, who had lived in the town decades ago. Thomas wrote about strange occurrences and disappearances, his fear palpable in his words. He described seeing shadowy figures and hearing whispers in the night. The last entry was a chilling account of his decision to leave the town, but it ended abruptly, as if he never got the chance to escape. As Megan read the journal, she heard faint whispers. She looked up to see ghostly figures wandering through the streets. Their forms were translucent, their faces twisted in expressions of sorrow and fear. Megan's heart pounded as she realized these were the spirits of the town's former residents. She stumbled out of the diner, the ghosts following her with mournful eyes. The town seemed to come alive with their presence, the air thick with their despair. Megan ran back to her car, desperate to escape the haunted town. Megan drove for what felt like hours, but the road signs seemed to lead her in circles. Every turn brought her back to the same place, the same landmarks passing by repeatedly. It was as if the highway itself was toying with her, refusing to let her leave. Panic set in as Megan realized she was trapped in an endless loop. The fog grew denser, the shadows longer. She felt like she was being watched, the feeling of unease growing with every passing minute. Suddenly, the spectral figure appeared again, this time standing in the middle of the road. Megan slammed on the brakes, the car screeching to a halt. The figure raised a hand, its eyes boring into hers with a look of desperation. "Leave this place," the figure whispered, its voice echoing in her mind. "You must find the key." Before she could ask what it meant, the figure disappeared, leaving Megan shaken and confused. Determined to escape, Megan searched the forest for the key. She scoured the underbrush, her hands shaking with fear and exhaustion. Hours passed before she found a small, rusty key lying on the forest floor, partially covered by fallen leaves and dirt. Megan picked it up, hope rekindling in her chest. She had no idea what the key was for, but she felt it was her only chance to break free from the highway's grasp. As she continued her search, Megan stumbled upon an old wooden door hidden in the side of a hill. The door was covered in ivy and moss, almost blending in with the surrounding foliage. She felt a strange sense of familiarity as she approached it. The key fit perfectly into the lock, and with a deep breath, Megan turned it. The door creaked open, revealing a dark, narrow passageway. She stepped inside, the air damp and cold. The tunnel was long and winding, its walls covered in ancient carvings. Megan's flashlight flickered, casting eerie shadows on the stone. The carvings depicted scenes of suffering and despair, the faces of the carved figures twisted in agony. Megan's footsteps echoed through the passage, the oppressive silence amplifying her fear. She felt like she was descending into the heart of the highway's mystery, each step bringing her closer to the truth. At the end of the tunnel, Megan entered a large underground chamber. The walls were covered in mirrors reflecting her flashlight in a disorienting array of light. The chamber was empty, save for a pedestal in the center. On the pedestal was an old, leather-bound book. Megan approached it cautiously, her reflection multiplying in the mirrors around her. She opened the book, her eyes scanning the faded pages. The book was filled with cryptic symbols and drawings, similar to the map she had found earlier. It detailed the history of the highway, revealing it was a place of ancient power, cursed by the spirits of those who had perished there. Megan realized the highway was a trap, feeding off the fear and despair of those who traveled it. The only way to escape was to confront the source of the curse and break the cycle of suffering. As she read, the air in the chamber grew colder. Ghostly figures began to materialize around her, their eyes filled with sorrow and anger. Megan stood her ground, clutching the book tightly. "I know your pain," she said, her voice trembling. "I will set you free." The spirits circled her, their whispers growing louder. Megan closed her eyes, focusing on the words in the book. She began to recite an incantation, the air crackling with energy. As she finished the incantation, a burst of light emanated from Megan, filling the chamber. The spectral figures dissolved into the air, their expressions softening as they vanished. The mirrors around her shattered, the sound echoing through the tunnel. Megan collapsed to the ground, exhausted but relieved. She felt the weight of the spirits lift, the oppressive atmosphere of the highway dissipating. Megan made her way back to her car, the dawn breaking over the horizon. The fog lifted, revealing a clear road ahead. She started her car and drove away, the oppressive feeling of the highway finally gone. As she left the forest behind, Megan felt a sense of peace. She had faced the darkness and survived, freeing the spirits trapped by the highway's curse. The road ahead was clear, and she knew she would never forget the lessons she had learned on the highway to nowhere.
Thank you for watching Midnight Knocks. If you enjoyed our horror stories, please give this video a thumbs up and hit that subscribe button for more spine-chilling tales. Don't forget to check out our other videos for more eerie adventures. Until next time, stay spooky.